Warrior podcast with Promise Phelon.
This is Promise Phelon, the Way of the Growth Warrior podcast, here with one of my favorite product marketers, and humans, Laura Smous, who is the Senior Director of Marketing at AdRoll, a division of NextRoll. So at some point, you'll tell us the difference between the two, because I know AdRoll, so you'll tell us in a second. But I've obviously known you for a long time, so I guess give me your version of our love story, and then I'll give my version of it. And then I want to just talk about marketing in uncertain times and the skills we need. But before we jump in, how do we know each other?
Wow, well, that's going way back. At the time, I was working for, I was working for a SaaS company in the HR tech space.
Yeah.
And they were right in on the cusp of a West Coast expansion, having a presence in the Bay Area. I think that was just after a large fundraise. I can't remember, just before, just after, right in the midst of fundraising. And I also was relocating at the time from Pennsylvania to Salt Lake City, Utah. And so we started in conversations, I think, to look at our subscriber base and really identify, and there were quite a few subscribers at that time. The company had gotten a lot of initial traction, but the customers all looked very different. And so really understanding how to do an evolution on the pricing and packaging strategy, and even knowing who you were building for was a little bit difficult. So I think we started talking around that time to see how we could better profile those folks who'd be successful, and the rest is history.
Well, I love that version. I mean, I'll tell you my version. Mine's more romantic than yours, obviously. But I'd become the CRO of that company, and the company had raised a small amount of money, but had a large group of customers. And so I was brought in to grow the ARPU, grow the revenue, and then get funding. And so all those things meant maximizing customers. And it meant that everyone wasn't equal, and it meant how do we understand it? And I remember people saying, there's this really smart person named Laura Smous. And I was just like, who's this person? And I remember sitting in a room with you, a cold one, and explaining that I wanted to understand our SOM for our existing market and then rebuild our SAM and TAM. And I remember saying that to you, and you kind of went, okay, I get it. I know how to do it. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. But what you did was you actually did 3 steps. You looked at the entire customer base, and you came up with these kind of characteristics. I don't know if you remember. There were funny names like a frog. I remember these funny names.
A turtle in there, I think. Yeah.
Yes, there were definitely a turtle. And then you put the customers into these cohorts, and then you analyze their behavior in a historical and a predictive sense. And it was brilliant. And actually, I just talked to the CEO of ProfitWell, and you and I could have built that app 5 years ago, right? Because a lot of the thinking was around how do you then influence pricing and packaging based on your customer and what they want and need. So I'm just curious, how have you used, because we did that twice, how have you used that framework in different places in where you've been, and how are you using it today at AdRoll?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I think, in the HR tech space, the challenge is a well-established category.
Yes.
Every business, there's hundreds of thousands of SMBs in the United States, and then you've got SMEs and enterprise, and everybody at some point, hopefully, is hiring, right? So the different types of users, the pace, the willingness to pay can be so vastly different depending on where they are in their trajectory. So I'd say in that setting where you have an established category,
yes,
you have a lot of players. It's really the thing you have to your advantage is you have tons of data, right? So we had many thousands of early customers, many longtime customers that we could study. And so we really could lean on that. So I think, in that sense, that framework for me was gather as much as you can from existing usage. Certainly qualitative interviews were a piece of it. Surveys were a piece of it. And then also, I think a lot of times, you can rely on your own knowledge informed by data, I think, to start to think through the different behavioral and psychographic profiles. So I think that's one thing that I always do is I say, any data you have, I'll take. Firmographic information is nice. Demographic information is nice, but it doesn't do a lot to explain why people behave the way that they behave. And I think we're all emotional buyers. I think at that time, there was a much bigger distinction made between B2C and B2B businesses, which I think we all buy in a B2C fashion, even if we're in a B2B setting. And so, so that piece was huge for me, especially in understanding, what people actually go through when they think about hiring. That's a little bit different. You've asked how I used it in different settings. It's a little bit different than we also worked together in the influencer marketing space, which at the time was an emerging, a booming but emerging category. And so people didn't know what they were buying, what they needed in a platform. They didn't want to do a lot of things themselves because I think traditionally it'd been a market served a lot by agencies. And so that was a big piece of it. So your task is really less around being able to rely on existing user data and more around what concepts you need people to understand in the market in order to accept what you're selling. So I think it's just, it's kind of a different lift, but it still goes back to, who are the people that you're talking to? Who are you not talking to? Yeah, what are your anti-personas? Because, again, for something like influencer marketing, your challenge is too big if you're trying to convince them that it's worth doing, period, and then to buy a premium platform to do it. So I think, in that setting, it was a little bit different. And now at AdRoll, we're seeing this huge convergence in the MarTech and ad tech, and people are calling it mad tech. So we're seeing a convergence in the tools, the teams, the budgets. And so it's a lot, again, I think around saying like, what can we leverage from the past? In their case, they have a massive data and machine learning asset, and saying like, how does that actually translate to our core customer, which is ambitious direct-to-consumer brands? What does that mean for them? And how does this asset that is, by the way, super buzzwordy and potentially super technical, how does that translate into something that's helpful to them, right? And again, if you go back to being pretty ruthless in who you allow in and who you cut from your ICP, I think, like I said, in the first case, you have just a breaking through the clutter in an established category challenge. The second case, you have an establishing a category challenge. And I think the third case, you have an adapting to an evolving market challenge. They're all solved with ICP.
We could go on just based on what you said.
Yeah.
I'm making two lists, okay? I'm making a list of terms you're going to define at the end for people who don't know what ad tech, MarTech, mad tech, DTC, ICP. So we'll come back to that.
Yes.
But you said one thing that reminded me of our work together and why I'm such a fan of yours is you said the word behavior. And when you talked about the customer of ad tech, you called them ambitious. And so that word is a determinant of a predictor of their behavior and how they respond to pricing, packaging, features, competitors, messaging, all of that. And so you were amazing, in my experience, taking ICP and then pulling string from pricing, packaging, positioning, features, who sold to them, do they go channel, do they go direct, all the way to what messages they hear. But the thing that I think you always came back to, and I supported this, is behavior. So two things that you talked about with behavior in the past. You used to talk about readiness to buy, right? And motivation. Why? Like, how do I get you more motivated? How do I assess your motivation? But then how do I assess your readiness? Because you could be the right customer, but not ready to buy. So if you look at that motivation and readiness and you put it into the context of we're all locked down in our homes today, what are things that marketers should be thinking about in the behavior of their customers?
Yeah, well, I think, one thing is we have much more of an ability than we did in the past to get data around people's existing behavior. If you are marketing to other businesses, to see inside their existing stack. And so I think the external flags that I would have looked at for readiness in the past are a lot easier to get now. And other companies are trying to get them. People are trying to make them more accessible, or at least give you some level of access to those. So I think to me, it's, things like if they don't already, buy things that are sold the way your thing is sold, now's not the time to try and convince them to. Give me an example. Well, I think, a great example would be investments in certain types of technology, right? So when we talk about ambition, well, what does that really mean? Everybody thinks they're ambitious. Well, not everybody's ambitious, right? When you are ambitious and you have growth intent, you invest.
Yes.
So you invest in things that you think will give you an edge. And there are external indicators of that. So, like I said, in a B2B sense, you can look at, there are tools like Built With and other things that give you some insight into not only like what have people tried. So you can see like, hey, they've tinkered with a lot of things. Like you can get an idea that somebody is experimental mindset, right? kind of a growth mindset. But you can also get a sense for what they've actually paid for, right? So at least at some point in time that they, for example, buy into the concept of investing in SaaS, right? So having, thinking that they can have a technology stack that'll fuel their growth. I think the same thing if you look in, for consumers, you start to look around, and this is especially important nowadays, but sort of like brand values. And you can say like, I don't need to, I can understand or maybe partner with other brands to gain access to like-minded consumers, even if our products are totally different, right? If our brands stand for similar things, we have a similar ethos. There's actually, I think, amazing ways to kind of band together and say, if they're interested in this or they're investing in this type of product, they probably are like have the right mindset for mine. Even there's a lot of social enterprise now, things like that. I think just seeing those flags and trying to understand, a lot of times when people look at the competitive environment, they're just looking at people they think are exactly like them.
Right.
When in reality, there's a lot of ways to understand someone's mindset and try and tap into that. And that's even, same thing with like how you advertise, how you do other things. You do a lot of targeting based on what people already do. And I think, that indicates a certain level of readiness.
I love that. And it's interesting because there's a lot of brand erosion happening now in this COVID crisis, and a lot of brand affinity being built. Mm-hmm. So totally agree with that. But I think your point around buying signals is really interesting. So when I work with our portfolio companies, I talk about 3 types of customers. An opportunistic customer, so someone who is looking, so around readiness, who just wants a deal. And they will almost take any kind of deal, right? So they're just opportunistic. They just want something quickly, and they love when things are priced right appropriately. There's an experimental customer, someone who is, I'll try a lot of different things because I'm solving a myriad of challenges, right? And I can think of my business partner, Stephen Nix. He's highly experimental, right? He wants to try different solutions just to understand what's happening and what's being solved in the world. And then there's the methodical customer. There's a customer who kind of shapes their buying criteria and knows what they want and knows what they're willing to pay. And I imagine that for different things, we are in those categories all the time, right? So when you're thinking about, how people are marketing right now, are we going after people who are opportunistic, or are we going after folks who are methodical? So in this crisis, who do we become as buyers?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's one thing that can't be underestimated right now, which I think is the scarcity mindset. So, I think that's caused, I would anticipate, an almost like overnight shift in what we're willing to consider. So take the example, although I'm a little tired of hearing about it, but toilet paper, right? We never as consumers thought we needed to have a direct relationship with a brand to buy toilet paper, right? A lot of those really highly commoditized consumer goods are just things that we just grab wherever. Maybe you have a preference, but like you probably couldn't really say exactly why. And you could be easily swayed if there were a sale somewhere else, right?
Right.
And now all we're thinking about is like, how do I get the next one? How do I make sure I have enough next month? So like your willingness to subscribe to a toilet paper company, that maybe cost a lot more than whatever was on sale at Target, 2 months ago when maybe you look at toilet paper, or again, to sort of like pay in advance for something that you can guarantee is going to be there for you when you need it. Your mind has changed overnight.
That is interesting, right? Because scarcity is on the other side of certainty.
Yeah.
Right. So when I have scarce resources, I want to know that I'm going to maximize my ROI, but I don't want to, not knowing what I'm going to have in a year or 6 months or 2 months or how long this will last. I don't want to keep committing, right?
Yeah.
So one of my companies, we actually changed our SaaS model to a lifetime membership.
Okay.
And so that has performed masterfully well because it's a one-time purchase, right? So your ROI goes through the roof because you don't have to think about it in the future. Are there mistakes in that, right? Which is, are you leaving lifetime value on the table? And how do you make that exchange in your business?
And I think this is one of the things that we were talking about earlier, which is, that calculation 2 weeks ago even might have looked very different. But I think the reality is that, we may be entering a sort of dark time for selling some of these products. And so I think having an established relationship now is the thing to optimize for, over squeezing every dollar in the short term. And I think, if the world doesn't recover, it doesn't matter. And if the world does recover, I think giving to get is going to be something that people appreciate, especially if we use the channels that we have to remind them of the relationship. And I think the other thing it does is it forces product development for a lot of companies, right? So let's assume that the thing you have is not going to be the only thing you have to sell forever. We have to start thinking about how do we actually create ways to expand that relationship naturally, because but what we were talking about earlier is by doing that one time, having that one-time fee, if people are really adopting and engaging, you can learn a lot about them. You can learn a lot about what they're actually doing with it, sort of independent of subscription, and that can inform what you build going forward, where you put things like feature gates and value metrics and all of that. And you might not have had the scale or adoption to really dive into that. If you're trying to force them to have the type of relationship you initially thought you'd have before all of this crisis hit. So I think that that's a lot of it. It's just, which battle do you want to fight, right? Do you want to, or what are you more confident in your ability to do? To study data and create lucrative products in the future, or to change behavior and belief? One's easier to do than the other.
Exactly. And behavior and belief is really challenging to do, especially in these times. You become very hardened. So I've started a couple companies in downturns. And the thing that I'm telling all my portfolio companies, and I'm telling the companies I'm on the board of, is not to solve for revenue, but to solve for cash. Yeah. And so and not to solve for profit, not to solve for anything that is ethereal or is conceptual, right? Because profit and revenue are concepts, whereas cash is kind of the only thing that matters at this point. Yeah. And so if you're a company and you're looking to maximize opportunity in these times, you said three things. You said give to get, which is I'm going to over deliver value in order to get your loyalty, or to get your revenue, or to get your spend. You talked about competing on value and on product, which I think is brilliant, and using expansion strategies as a way to do that. And then lastly, you kind of alluded to looking at the Laffer curve and kind of manipulating pricing based on perception. Yeah. And so where do you start?
I think that the first place for me would be to try and understand the immediate barriers. So again, this goes back to understanding your customer. And if you have a decent body of work around that already, you can kind of go back to that, but saying since we were focused and we had this really narrowly defined ICP, right? Yeah. Which again is scary to folks because it means sort of conceptually cutting people out a little bit. But it also means that you should know that person, and they really should be almost like whether they're a firm or whatever. You should know them well enough to anticipate what those barriers would be when something like this happens, right? It's what are their first objections going to be? What are they going to be worrying about? What type of changes are they going to be having to make in their business? How much cash do they keep on hand? How deep a relationship do they have with their existing vendors? Is there a chance for me to unseat somebody right now? There's so many things that if you know them well, you can anticipate and move quickly on. So that's where I would start, is saying what are going to be the first things that they're going to be solving for right now, and how do I fit into that world, right? Not try and create a new paradigm at this time, not try and change the way that they buy things, but slide right in the easiest way possible. And maybe it's a series of barriers, right? So it's breaking it down into the, each one of those steps to get them to do the next right thing to continue the relationship.
It's interesting because so in the last 24 hours, and this is interesting based on what you just said, which is and understand the immediate barriers, right? You've got this website now. The SBA has said you can get a loan up to $10 million, right? Right, exactly. So that face. So imagine you're a small business owner. What is the first thing you do? You go hit that website. Yeah. And it's the government. And so that website is extremely slow. And I read the email that they sent out, and I thought to myself, why not address and name people's immediate concerns? It's going to take a long time to figure out that I'm not applicable. I'm going to waste time. I'm going to lose opportunity. Yeah. And so when I think about the immediate barriers, I kind of imagine like a 5-step chess move. So one is I'm going to understand it and know who feels it the most gravely, right? And then I'm going to name it something. Like I'm going to call it something, right? Like server anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Whatever for this SBA thing. I'm going to talk about it. Because I think that's what's missing in most marketing is we get so benefit language oriented that we don't agitate what everyone knows is the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to find as many ways as possible to remove the barriers and to reduce the friction. And then I'm going to think about how our relationship will be different as a result. Right.
Yeah.
So like, does that make sense? Like, because end of the day, the SBA was created to fund and to amplify small businesses, using that as an example. But our relationship to it is theoretical.
Yeah.
So if I go through this process of understanding it's going to be hard to get, et cetera, the relationship I should get at the end is trust.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're looking at how marketers are marketing today, because I'm sure your email box is full of deals, what are they screwing up? Like, what are you seeing that you're going, okay, that doesn't address the barriers I perceive. That doesn't name them. That doesn't change the like what are you seeing that's not working?
Well, I think, that's a great question because absolutely every company is sending these emails, right? I mean, I think the first mistake, quite honestly, is overestimating our importance in the recipient's life.
Okay.
Period. But especially right now. And I think that it doesn't mean that. I also don't agree. There are other brands who are completely backing down, right? They're saying, I'm afraid to market to you right now because and I think that's actually wrong too. I mean, something that I learned from you for sure was being prescriptive and being comfortable being prescriptive.
Yeah.
So if you have a brand or product, whatever it is, let's hope you believe in it, because otherwise, what are you doing every day, right? So you just need to key in on where does this really matter in their life, and so instead of a generic message from the CEO that's like, well, we intend to be here for you, which is like, well, what does that mean if you're, trying to think of something, but if you're like a power bar provider, like what, like, can I actually call you? Or are you going to give me free food when my pantry runs out? And so, to find that point of authenticity, whatever that is, and just like you said, be direct about it. And I think the other thing is, again, like not to be afraid to try and figure out where you can provide guidance and be prescriptive about it. Because I mean, that's the overarching thing is people don't know what's going to happen. There is uncertainty. And so to have someone not only, like you said, do something that establishes trust, which I think Giving to Get does, but then also tell you what to do. Now, that might be a very small thing. It might be like what to eat or when to order something or whatever it is, or what to order. Just tell me what to do so there's something I'm not uncertain about. I think that is potentially tremendously helpful, but it requires a thoughtfulness that I think a lot of, especially marketers, I hate to say it, but we're not used to, right? We're pretty enamored with the words we develop to talk about what we do. And
pretty enamored with the words we develop. What does that mean?
I mean, I think that, again, the best marketing is it's whatever gets your audience to take the next right action, right? And so it doesn't matter how clever we think something is. It doesn't matter how strong we think messaging that we sat around in a room together with other people in our company is. If we're not like actually looking at how it's landing and how people respond to it and being real about that, I think it's even in an up economy, it's kind of fruitless, but especially in one now where it's a very different time. I think you have to be kind of ruthless about it again and say, like, is there something we provide of value right now? And are we naming it correctly? Ego is such a tough thing, especially when you've built products you love, especially, like I said, when we've created language you love about your products. It's such a hard thing to throw those out the window and say, like, not the right thing right now.
Okay, so you've said three things. You said, look, you don't matter yet. So be prescriptive and remove uncertainty or probably decision fatigue from your customer, right? Like make it easy. And then last is be consistent and authentic, right? But as you're talking, it reminds me of a discussion that's happening around product marketing, a religious one of where does it live?
Oh, I love this question.
Okay. So you talked about ego and ruthlessness. And so I believe the more steps removed you are from the senior team, the less you can talk about those things. The less ruthless you can be because you don't have your finger on that pulse. and you don't have permission. But so first of all, define product marketing, because most people don't know what that is. And talk about, because it's not marketing products, but talk about where you believe product marketing fits in the mind as well as the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I think product marketing should be to an organization is the voice of customer in aggregate to the company, the voice of the market to the company, and then the voice of the product to the company, to the customer, and to the market. Right? So it's kind of like this, I guess it's a Venn diagram. I've struggled with how to represent this visually, but I mean, that's really what it's about. We're like the great aggregators of information and turning it into insight. And so, I believe that there are should be a huge transformative force in a company, should be a very strong strategic partner for different groups, product being a really natural one, but certainly sales, marketing, customer success, lots of groups within the company, because they have that vantage point. So again, and a lot of companies just leverage product marketing to sort of describe what's already been built.
Right.
I think product marketing should really be helping assess and inform what should be built, in conjunction with senior leadership, in conjunction with the larger mission and vision of the company. People generally ask, I think Andy Raskin had a LinkedIn post that was like, should it report directly to the CEO?
Engineering, yeah.
And so, I mean, I'd say, no offense, but a little distance from CEOs is good, because
I'm so offended by that.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, I mean, I've spent a large part of my career reporting directly to CEOs. I think there's a lot of advantage to that, but I also think that sometimes, depending on how big the team is and how much work they need to get done, you don't want too much thrash, right? So if there's too much direct swooping in,
thrashy, yes.
Yeah. But I'd say for me, like sales is a no-go, because to me, the way sales teams are incentivized is not always going to be congruent with telling the truth about the market and the customer or the product. Same thing for product and engineering, right? They're measured in a very different way. And so the best team, I think, if it's going to be not reporting to the CEO, but the best team I would say is the marketing team, because product marketing should really be what's known in research as an honest broker. That's like really the role that they need to serve. And so if the incentives are wrong, you will get people, especially if you have more junior team members, trying to match the message to the incentive. And that's not reality. Like, we have to be the stark bearers of reality.
I think that's true. And the only thing that I would add to that, and just as a piggyback, I always insisted that I had line of sight to you and your teams, because I want the product marketing insight that helps to unpack what's happening in the business. Yeah. So if customers are becoming more price sensitive and there's less elasticity, is that because of us, or because the market's changing, or because of a competitor? If if lifetime value is fluctuating, like, what is it? And so product marketing, staying inside of the business, but also using those unit economics as a gauge, for me, is always important in the C-suite. So let me ask you a couple of questions. So can you answer and define these terms? So for a lot of folks, what is MarTech? What is AdTech? What is ICP, DTC, Stack? And then what are your favorite tools that you're like, what do you have open right now on your desktop as a product marketer?
Ooh, okay. So MarTech is the abbreviation for marketing technology. So if anyone has looked at Lumascape that gets put out, there are, I think in the past year, it was something like 7,040. Yeah. And that might be between, MarTech is marketing technology, AdTech is advertising technology. We're seeing a lot of platforms and plays to sort of combine the two. Yeah. People have different starting points, but they kind of are all barking up the same tree. And again, the main reason for that is spend, breaking down silos, understanding what your comprehensive sort of marketing strategy and investment is and how it's performing. And so if you have, your advertising activities in one place, your marketing activities in another place, and within those silos, there are silos, it's really hard to understand what you're doing and how it's performing. And I'm sure you can appreciate as a CEO how inexplicable sometimes the things that come back from marketing teams are, because they're piecing together all of these activities and all of these investments, and it's impossible to understand if you've got duplication. So that's MarTech and AdTech. People invest heavily in tools, very often software as a service tools for both now.
Yeah.
And so that's your stack. So even tiny marketing teams, sometimes single person teams, 4 to 6 technologies in their stack, 7+ technologies in their stack. That's the majority of us.
Right.
And then you look at companies that are, even start to have a little specialization, and the amount of sprawl and just like sheer subscriptions and tools that you have becomes really unwieldy. So even knowing what your teams are doing, knowing how much you're spending, knowing where your data is and your customers' data is sort of wild. So that's one thing. And it said ICP. So that's your ideal customer profile. So when you're starting to think about who do we exist for? Who do we build for? Where do we invest in customer acquisition? You need a clear profile of that customer for whom you'll provide the most value and from whom you'll get the most value, right? So it's those folks that by making a match, like both sides should really benefit. It's the definition of that. And again, that definition is, part firmographic, it's part behavioral and psychographic. And yes, companies have behavioral and psychographic traits, right? They start to beat like the heart of a human, especially a lot of the companies we have now that just as there's been such a boom in tech, like they grow quickly, they take on a life of their own, a value system of their own, and so they buy in a certain way, they think in a certain way, and that can be defined and used to your advantage. And then D2C, so it's either D2C, DTC, is short for direct to consumer. So you think about the example that's overused, but direct-to-consumer mattress company explosion. Back in the day, not that long ago, there was Sealy, there was Serta, a few others. You'd go to a mattress store, you'd lie on some mattresses. Somebody would probably be like a high-pressure salesperson. And now there are at least 175, last I counted, direct-to-consumer online mattress brands where you get a box, you cut the plastic, it explodes in your house. They all look and sound very similar, very hard to tell one from another. And so direct to consumer is just, it's a business model where you have a direct relationship with your customer. So, and where that actually is a core sort of tenet of your business. So if you think about a brand like Harry's, which I think is now in Target, doesn't mean you can't sell in a retailer, but if you think about somebody like Gillette, they've been in Target, you've probably never had a relationship with Gillette, probably never got regular emails from them or had any thoughts about, although they're trying to change that perception, but what type of person uses this blade versus this blade. There's been a lot of disruption in that space where, there's this subscription razor blades, you have a direct relationship with the company. They can look at your behavior and understand what might be best for you and use that to help fuel their business. It's also different than folks who are like, let's say, Amazon only sellers, right? Amazon is a very love-hate relationship with Amazon because Prime is great, but they own that relationship with your customer. So if that's the primary platform you're using to sell, they're using all that data to get smarter about you and then to figure out how to unseat you as a brand. And you're getting none of that back to understand your overall mix.
So this, at the end of our podcast, it comes out. So a couple questions I was going to end with. So in this crisis, what do you recommend for someone starting a brand new company? And how do they navigate ICP and customer when they're starting? And then someone who's looking to scale and grow, because you've done both. But I want to address what you just raised, which is it's one big construct, which is someone already owned your customer. So there are ways to accelerate time to market, but those strategies may not be sustainable because you don't get that data, right, from the customer. So if you were a business, so we, one of my companies, we did a deal with AppSumo, which is an online deal provider. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they're like Stack Social, Stack Commerce. They give you customers, and those customers, transact through them, and they own the relationship. And so we went from like 0 to 1,000 customers through this channel overnight. It was beautiful. And so what we realized is we weren't learning those customers. Yeah. So as a startup or as a small company looking to scale, and you've got the chance to go indirect, how do you make the decision of, do you go or not? And if you do go, like, what's the future look like in terms of getting to understand who your customers are and their motivation and readiness and behavior?
I think understanding really what you want that relationship to be and how you're going to support that over their entire life cycle is a big piece of it. Yeah. So a lot of times there's two reasons people buy They may know about you, but they're going to buy on Amazon. Price and convenience, right? And so I would say, I think brands need to be much more explicit about making sure that they have some planning about that whole life cycle, so that you are offering them the best deal. They know if they come to you, they're going to get the best setup, right? And maybe that's cheaper, maybe that's shipping, which I know can be a real challenge for a lot of smaller businesses to like match that Amazon speed. But I have at different conferences and things like that heard from some brands who are smaller, have always been small, have been around since the 90s, and the things that they do to offset the fact that they can't ship as fast as Prime. It was a flip-flop manufacturer, actually. they would make sure to get, sometimes people would be on vacation and need something delivered to their hotel, or what they had a service component that they really ratcheted up, and they were always really, and they also had sort of like I said, a social enterprise environmental component, right? So they, number one, understood who they were, which we talked about. Number two, understood that like those things were important to their customer, so they understood that customer, and then they reminded them of it, right? So it wasn't just like transact and then you don't hear from us. It was making sure that they stayed in front of them, making sure that they reminded them that by continuing to buy direct from them, they were supporting these other things that they believed in. So they could give themselves a pat on the back. They knew the company had their back if they needed to have something overnighted. It may still cost them, but that there was this service component. It wasn't like you contact the Amazon seller through like the mysterious messaging and you like, who knows who's on the other end. So I think in that sense, again, understanding who you are as a brand and not being afraid to remind people of that, having regular lifecycle communications so that you are actually present and rewarding them for that interaction. And then, understanding for the customer what other things maybe you can provide that something like an Amazon or another third party can't. And just, making sure that you provide those well and invest in those areas. And again, I don't think that means that, there's never a reason for you to sell some of your product through Amazon. But to me, the risk is pretty high. I think compared to losing access to that customer data. And then, you hit a time like we are right now, and they have pretty direct control over everything they do with your inventory.
The supply chain is owned, right? Yeah. So what I like about what you said is what we learned from the AppSumo experiment is first we were like, oh, we don't own the customer. And then we went back and we studied how that channel worked. And it reminds me of like buying from Hotel Tonight or buying, like you buy from an intermediary. And what I've noticed, one of my favorite hotel in New York is the Roger Hotel. You probably know this already, but like I've been going there forever. And I went there and they learned that I bought my room through Hotel Tonight. And to your point about reminding, they were like, Miss Phelon, we do what Hotel Tonight does. You can trust us. We always give you the best deals if you come direct. And boom, 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 boom. And I said, but Hotel Tonight gives me all this other information about other hotels that you don't. And they said, okay. And so what I found them doing, and I find like the smart folks doing, is they're looking at how the channel acquires and how they sell their product. And they're replicating them. AppSumo, for this one portfolio company, did a better job of marketing our product than we did.
Yeah.
And so we went back and were like, oh, they used all video to promote our product. We have no video on our website. How do we? And so I think that the channel is a way to discover what things your customers actually want to buy at scale that you may not be selling, or in the way you may not be selling them. So I think there's that. But I like what you said first, which is give to get, because if Amazon is giving your customer everything, then there's not really much they need from you. So if there's more from a service perspective. So bring us home. If you're a small startup or a small company and you're in this market and you're worried about cash and all the other things, or if you're looking to scale, how do you market in a time of crisis? What's your advice, Laura?
Well, I mean, the one thing that that people absolutely should do is turn inward and look at their existing customer base. So that's a group of people that you've probably spent less time on.
Yes.
That are massively more cost efficient, even in an up economy, to interact with and gain revenue from than new customers. So I think that's one piece, is get your arms around your existing customer base. They're much more likely to try new products. They're much more likely to buy period from you than a new customer. And so get your house in order. the other thing, and this is a shameless plug, but there are companies like AdRoll, but there are a lot that I think maybe don't, when there's tons of cash floating around, people want the deepest of every single tool and platform. And I think the Marie Kondo marketing stack is what people need now. I didn't make that up, but yeah, I mean, because your headspace, you're not going to be able to take advantage of all of these things. Because teams are going to be smaller, things are going to be happening more quickly, and so simplify. Work with trusted partners, and also work with people who have a lot of data and can make that actionable for you. Because again, even with your existing customer data, you only have your first party data, right? But other companies have a
augment that
footprint, yeah. And so you want to, in order to make the most out of those relationships you already have, you need more insight about them, especially if you've been sort of lax. And so partner with those folks so that you're getting them in the right time with the right message, and again, maximizing that investment you already made to acquire them.
Got it. That's beautiful. And I, we could talk about this for hours, and I want to let you get back to your day job. But if people wanted to get more information, are you speaking anywhere virtually, obviously, or any information they can find about you online?
Yeah. Well, certainly my LinkedIn profile, Laura Smous, Smous, was supposed to speak at a product marketing event in about a week in New York. That has been rescheduled for July, so stay tuned on that. And
awesome.
Please feel free to reach out and connect with me. I love all of these things, as you know, and can talk forever. So thank you for the opportunity.
This is beautiful, and thank you. Give your daughter a big hug for me and the family. Hopefully she remembers me from back in the day, which
sure she will. She has a sharp memory. So
right, of course. Well, thank you, Laura. This has been awesome to have you on the Wear the Warrior podcast. And it's just been great to reconnect. And this will be out very soon.
Absolutely. Take care.